My wife declared. I never loved you. It was always him. I nodded. Then I transferred all assets to a hidden account, served her papers, and left. 4 days later, she contacted from shelter, begging for a second chance. I, 34M, thought I had the perfect marriage. 7 years together, a beautiful house in the suburbs, 2 cars in the driveway, and what I believed was genuine love. My wife worked as a marketing coordinator while I built my software consulting business from the ground up. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our shared dreams of starting a family soon. Looking back, I realized I was living in a carefully constructed illusion. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday evening in March. I came home early from a client meeting that got canceled, expecting to surprise her with takeout from her favorite Thai place. Instead, I found her on the couch, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in hushed tones that immediately made my stomach drop. She quickly ended the call when she saw me, claiming it was just her sister discussing weekend plans. But her flushed cheeks and the way she clutched the phone told a different story. Over the next few weeks, the signs multiplied like a virus spreading through our marriage. Late nights at the office became more frequent. Her phone, once casually left on counters and tables, now lived permanently in her purse or pocket. She started working out obsessively, buying new clothes, changing her perfume. When I complimented her new look, she brushed it off as wanting to feel better about herself. I wanted to believe her, so I did. The breaking point came on a Friday night in April. I had been tracking our joint credit card statements as part of my monthly financial review when I noticed charges at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels in the city during times she claimed to be at work conferences, and purchases at lingerie stores that never made it into our bedroom. My hands shook as I printed out 3 months of statements, highlighting each suspicious transaction in yellow marker. That evening, I confronted her in our kitchen while she prepared dinner. I spread the statements across the granite countertop like evidence in a courtroom. I asked her to explain the charges, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. She glanced at the papers, then at me, and something shifted in her expression. The mask she'd been wearing for months finally slipped away. She told me she'd been seeing someone from her old college. They'd reconnected at a mutual friend's wedding 6 months ago. What started as innocent catching up had evolved into something more. She admitted to the hotels, the dinners, the gifts. But then she said something that carved itself into my memory forever. She had never really loved me the way she loved him. Our entire marriage had been her settling for security while her heart belonged to someone else. I stood there, absorbing her words like punches to the gut. She continued, explaining how she'd tried to make our marriage work, how she'd convinced herself that love would grow over time, but seeing him again had awakened feelings she'd buried for years. She said she was sorry, that she never meant for it to happen this way, but she couldn't pretend anymore. I nodded. That was all I could manage. A simple nod while my world collapsed around me. She seemed surprised by my calm reaction. She probably expected anger, tears, pleading. Instead, I told her I understood and that I needed some time to process everything. I asked if she was planning to leave me for him, and she said she didn't know yet. She needed time to figure things out. I gave her a hug, told her I loved her, and went to bed early. She stayed downstairs, probably calling him to report on our conversation. I lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through 7 years of memories, wondering which moments were real and which were performance. But I wasn't broken. I was calculating. The next morning, I woke up before dawn and drove to my office. I had work to do, and it wasn't the kind that involved code or client meetings. I spent the weekend researching divorce lawyers, asset protection strategies, and forensic accountants. I documented every suspicious charge, every lie, every piece of evidence that would support my case. By Monday, I had a plan. My first call was to the best divorce attorney in the city. I scheduled a consultation for that afternoon, bringing copies of all our financial records, the credit card statements, and a detailed timeline of her affair. The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s, listened to my story with professional detachment and outlined my options. Given the evidence of adultery and financial infidelity, I had strong grounds for a favorable settlement. My second call was to my business accountant. Over the years, I'd been careful to keep my consulting business separate from our joint assets, but there were still connections that needed to be severed. We discussed strategies for protecting my business assets and ensuring my wife couldn't claim ownership of work I'd built before and during our marriage. The third call was to my bank. I opened a new account at a different institution, one where my wife had no access or knowledge. Over the next 2 days, I systematically transferred funds from our joint accounts, leaving only enough to cover immediate household expenses. I moved my business accounts, my investment portfolios, and even the emergency fund we'd built together. Every dollar I'd contributed to our marriage was quietly relocated to accounts bearing only my name. I also discovered something interesting during my financial investigation. The credit card charges weren't just for hotels and dinners. She'd been using our joint account to buy him gifts, expensive watches, clothing, even a weekend getaway to a mountain resort. She'd been funding her affair with our money I'd earned through countless late nights building my business, while she played house with me during the day and lover with him after hours. On Wednesday, exactly 1 week after her confession, I had the divorce papers drawn up. The petition cited adultery and sought an unequal division of assets based on her financial infidelity. I also requested that she be responsible for all debts incurred during her affair, including the credit card charges for her romantic escapades. That evening, I came home to find her in the living room, looking more relaxed than she had in months. She'd probably spent the day with him, making plans for their future together. She asked how my day went, and I told her it was productive. She smiled, probably thinking I was adjusting well to our new reality. I served her the papers over breakfast on Thursday morning. Her reaction was everything I'd expected and more. The color drained from her face as she read through the legal documents. She looked up at me with wide eyes, asking what this meant. I explained calmly that I was filing for divorce and that she had 30 days to respond. She started to protest, saying we could work things out, that she'd made a mistake, that she wanted to try counseling. I reminded her of her words from the previous week. She'd never loved me. It was always him. I was simply giving her the freedom to be with the person she actually wanted. She asked about our house, our accounts, our shared life. I informed her that I'd already taken steps to protect my assets and that she'd need to find her own legal representation. The look of panic in her eyes was almost satisfying. Almost. I packed a suitcase that morning and moved into a furnished apartment across town. I left her the house temporarily, knowing it would be sold as part of the divorce proceedings anyway. I also left her with the joint credit cards, which she'd discover were maxed out from her affair-related expenses, and the joint checking account, which now contained exactly $500. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. Update 1. The next few days passed in a blur of legal meetings and financial reorganization. My lawyer was impressed with the documentation I'd gathered and confident we'd achieve a favorable outcome. My business was completely protected, my personal assets were secure, and the evidence of her affair was overwhelming. On Sunday, 3 days after I'd moved out, I received the first text message. She wanted to talk. I didn't respond. The messages continued throughout the day, each one more desperate than the last. She was sorry. She'd made a terrible mistake. She wanted to work things out. She loved me after all. I blocked her number. Monday brought a call from her sister, asking what had happened and begging me to reconsider. I politely explained that her sister had been having an affair and had told me she'd never loved me. There wasn't anything to reconsider. The sister seemed shocked, claiming she had no idea about the affair. I believed her. My wife had been living a double life so completely that even her family was fooled. Tuesday, I received a call from my lawyer. My wife had contacted several divorce attorneys, but none would take her case. Word had spread quickly through the legal community about the strength of my evidence and the thoroughness of my preparation. She was going to have to look outside the city for representation, which would be expensive and inconvenient. Wednesday brought another surprise. My wife's lover, the man she'd claimed to love all along, had apparently disappeared from her life. According to mutual friends, he'd been transferred to his company's West Coast office and had made it clear he wasn't interested in a long-distance relationship. The affair that had destroyed our marriage had evaporated the moment it became inconvenient for him. Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after I'd served her papers, my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. It was my wife, calling from what sounded like a payphone. Her voice was shaky, desperate. She told me she was at a women's shelter downtown. She'd been evicted from our house when she couldn't make the mortgage payment. The joint accounts were empty. The credit cards were maxed out, and she had nowhere else to go. She begged me to meet her, to talk, to give her another chance. She said she'd realized she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. She did love me. She'd always loved me. The affair was just a moment of weakness, a fantasy that had gotten out of control. She wanted to come home. I listened to her pleas, her promises, her desperate attempts to undo 7 months of betrayal with 7 minutes of apologies. When she finished, I told her I was sorry she was in that situation, but it was a consequence of her own choices. I reminded her that she'd had months to end the affair and tell me the truth. Instead, she'd chosen to lie, cheat, and steal from our marriage until she was caught. She started crying, begging me not to abandon her like he had. She promised she'd do anything to make it right. She'd go to counseling. She'd cut off all contact with him. She'd spend the rest of her life making it up to me. I told her it was too late. The divorce would proceed as planned. She asked what she was supposed to do, where she was supposed to go. I suggested she contact her family or friends for help. She said she was too ashamed to tell them the truth about what she'd done. I hung up. Update 2. The call from the shelter haunted me for about an hour. Not because I felt guilty, but because I realized how completely she'd misunderstood our entire relationship. She'd spent 7 years treating our marriage like a safety net while she waited for something better to come along. Now that her better option had vanished, she expected me to still be there, ready to catch her fall. But I wasn't the same man who'd nodded quietly in our kitchen a week ago. That man had been destroyed by her confession. The person who remained was someone who'd learned that love without respect is just elaborate manipulation. Over the next few days, I heard through mutual friends that she'd moved in with her parents in another state. Her mother had driven down to collect her from the shelter, and the family was reportedly devastated by the news of our divorce. They'd always liked me, and learning about her affair had apparently caused significant tension within their household. My lawyer called with an update on the proceedings. Her new attorney, someone she'd found 3 hours away, was attempting to negotiate a more favorable settlement. They were claiming that her affair was a symptom of problems in our marriage, not the cause of them. They wanted to argue for a 50-50 split of assets and shared responsibility for debts. I instructed my lawyer to reject any settlement offers. We had the evidence, the law was on our side, and I wanted this to go to trial if necessary. I'd spent too many years building my life and business to hand half of it over to someone who'd betrayed me so completely. 3 weeks after the initial papers were served, I received a handwritten letter forwarded through my lawyer. It was 12 pages of my wife's handwriting, detailing her remorse, her realization of what she'd lost, and her desperate hope for reconciliation. She wrote about our early years together, the dreams we'd shared, the life we'd built. She claimed that losing me had made her realize that what we had was real love, and what she'd felt for him was just infatuation. The letter was well-written, emotional, and completely irrelevant. She was trying to rewrite history, to paint her affair as a temporary lapse in judgment rather than a deliberate choice she'd made every day for 7 months. She wanted me to believe that her love for me had been dormant, not absent, and that her betrayal was somehow proof of how much our marriage meant to her. I filed the letter with the rest of the divorce paperwork and moved on with my life. Update 3. 2 months after serving the papers, our divorce was finalized. The judge awarded me 70% of our joint assets, citing her financial infidelity and adultery as factors in the unequal distribution. She was responsible for all debts incurred during her affair, including the credit card charges and a personal loan she'd taken out to fund a weekend trip with her lover. The house was sold, and after paying off the mortgage and legal fees, I received the majority of the proceeds. My business remained entirely mine, as did my investment accounts and retirement funds. She walked away with her car, her personal belongings, and approximately $30,000, enough to start over, but not enough to maintain the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to during our marriage. I also learned some interesting details during the discovery process. Her affair had been more extensive than I'd initially realized. It had started not 6 months ago, but over a year ago, during a business trip where they'd both been attending a conference. The wedding story had been a lie designed to make the timeline seem shorter and the betrayal less calculated. She'd also been planning to leave me for months before I discovered the truth. Her lover had been promised a promotion that would have allowed him to support her, and they'd been making plans for her to move across the country to be with him. His sudden transfer and loss of interest had derailed their plans, leaving her trapped in a marriage she'd already mentally abandoned. The most painful revelation was that she'd been actively undermining our relationship during the affair. She'd been telling him details about our private life, our financial situation, even our intimate moments. She'd been comparing us constantly, using our marriage as a measuring stick for her affair. I hadn't just been betrayed. I'd been studied, analyzed, and found wanting by two people who'd been conducting their relationship in the shadow of mine. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into her at a coffee shop downtown. She looked different, thinner, tired, older somehow. She was working as a receptionist at a dental office, living in a small apartment, driving a used car that had seen better days. The confident, radiant woman who'd been planning her escape from our marriage had been replaced by someone who looked defeated by life. She approached me hesitantly, asking if we could talk. I agreed to sit with her for a few minutes, curious about what she might say. She told me she'd been in therapy, working through her issues, trying to understand why she'd destroyed the best thing in her life. She said she thought about me every day, wondered if I was happy, hoped I could someday forgive her. I told her I was doing well. I'd expanded my business, bought a new house, started dating someone who actually seemed to enjoy my company. I said I hoped she was finding peace and building a better life for herself. She asked if there was any chance we could be friends someday. I considered the question seriously before answering. I told her that friendship required trust, and trust required honesty. She'd spent over a year lying to me about the most fundamental aspects of our relationship. I didn't think friendship was possible between us. She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. She said she understood and that she was sorry for everything she'd put me through. She hoped I'd be happy with someone who deserved me. I wished her well and left. Final update. A year later, I'm engaged to someone who chose me not as a backup plan, but as her first choice. She's kind, honest, and has never made me question whether her feelings are genuine. We're building something together based on mutual respect and authentic love. I occasionally wonder what would have happened if my wife had been honest with me from the beginning. If she'd told me she was having doubts about our marriage, if she'd asked for counseling, if she'd ended things before starting her affair. We might have worked through our problems, or we might have divorced amicably. Either outcome would have been better than the elaborate deception she chose instead. But I'm grateful for how things turned out. Her betrayal taught me the difference between being loved and being used. It showed me that I deserved better than someone who saw our marriage as a consolation prize. Most importantly, it proved that I was strong enough to walk away from a situation that was destroying me, even when walking away meant starting over completely. The woman who declared she'd never loved me did me the greatest favor of my life. She set me free to find someone who actually would. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be someone's backup plan and building a life so much better than what you had that you can't imagine why you ever settled for less. I never looked back.